You're listening to Going to Extremes, discussing the UK jobs market, brought to you by Sopra Steria Insights.
Hello and welcome to Sopra Steria Insights. I'm Alison McHarg from the UK marketing team, and I'm joined today by recruitment and resourcing expert Nick Heckscher, Chief Experience Officer in our resourcing services sector. As a resourcing expert with particular expertise in the public sector, Nick is going to help me understand some of the challenges and shifting demands in the current UK recruitment market. Recruitment touches most of our lives as employees, employers, hiring managers searching for one new colleague or delivering volume recruitment campaigns, and of course, most likely as candidates ourselves. What is clear in today's recruitment market is that there are extremes we're all exposed to, whatever part of the recruitment process we're involved with. Nick, this is a great time for you to come in. Tell us a bit more about these extremes.
Morning, Alison. And before we move to extremes, you're right, actually, that everybody has a really strong opinion about recruitment and resourcing. It's really interesting as I work alongside colleagues and in all sorts of working with all sorts of different customers in all sorts of different contexts. Not everyone's an expert in pensions. Not everyone's an expert in procurement. Not everyone's an expert in sort of HR casework, and yet everybody has at some stage been interviewed and has an opinion. And if they haven't been interviewed, and they've sort of interviewed for themselves. So if everyone knows what good looks like, and it's an interesting sort of narrative when you go in and talk to customers, because without wanting to be dismissive of that, there's this one thing that says everyone's a little bit of an expert or thinks they're a little bit of an expert, but actually our customers are way more knowledgeable and experienced than they were when I came into the recruitment industry 30 years or so ago.
Sure.
Yeah, when I first started in recruitment in 1996, we'd be having conversations with customers about why they should be using temporary staff or hiring permanently. Whereas now you'll go into a conversation with a customer about an applicant tracking system, and they'll be able to rank the sort of top 4 or 5 providers in the market. The sort of sophistication of our customers in this space is significant, and I don't underestimate it. Coming back to the question that you asked, though, which was about sort of the state of the market, and I think you used the phrase extremes. Yeah, it really is a little bit polarized out there, and it's been that way probably since COVID. I think pre-COVID, we were living in a world where we'd kind of got our heads around the version of these sort of talent shortages, and the fact that the recruiter challenge was all about finding the right candidates, priority number one, and then kind of keeping them through the process and fighting off competition. But since COVID, employers in general, not just within the public sector, but employers in general have kind of under-anticipated what's going to happen in their own workforce and the labour market. And they have then overreacted. And that's led to a kind of constant feast or famine, where you're either there's no candidates or there's loads of candidates. And it's kind of never been Goldilocks, I suppose. As I sort of talk about it with customers, it's never just right. Whether that's the whole market's really hot right now or the whole market's really tough. And I think in general, probably if you're seeking a job right now, it is pretty tough out there. There aren't the roles that lots and lots of people are looking for. And yet there are still some pockets where it's absolutely, filling that job is gold dust. So the recruiter challenge is has really polarized. In terms of either being absolutely inundated or really have to go and find a needle in a haystack.
That's interesting. And I like your use of the word sophistication, because, of course, we probably all think we understand the recruitment market. We hear headlines, we hear about trends. But you talk about sophistication, Nick. Is that more a tech sophistication you mean? Or is it the recruiter understands better the talent attraction services are helping them understand better who the candidate should be? Is the employer more sophisticated now? Just tease that out a bit, because I thought you apply for a job and you follow a similar process. Explain a bit more.
So there's quite a lot in your question for me to unpack, and we might come back a little later to following a similar process. But in terms of the point around sophistication, I suppose what I'm really getting at is that the world of work, the world of HR has specialized. And increasingly we were dealing with kind of, and again, I'm going back 20, 30 years, we'd be dealing with generalists, and we're not dealing with generalists right now. If we want to have if our customer wants to talk to us about diversity, then we will talk to someone who is storied and seasoned in diversity. If a customer thinks they're not attracting staff in the right way, they will have their own experts in sort of social media and how they use social media and sort of paid search and so on to ensure that the right candidates are coming. So I think there's both a kind of collective up knowledge that's gone on in the world of resourcing, but there's also a specialization, which means that we as providers of recruitment services have to have kind of more experts in our arsenal who can talk credibly and confidently in front of experts customer side and kind of co-solve problems. I think there is another angle to that, which is we're kind of data hungry. And that's actually really interesting for our kind of working with some of our wider colleagues in Sopra Steria, especially as we kind of think about data and AI. And again, we might come on to that at some of in due course. But just playing with the data hungry bit for a minute, and the sort of some of the data sophistication, how the market is responding to that hunger for data. There are now providers out there who can help us as recruiters, and of course our customers understand the recruiting challenge that they're going into. And I talked about it being extremes. Well, let's pick an extreme example. One of our customers right now is trying to recruit an ethical hacker. They're in London, and if we look across the London labour market, our analytics shows us that there are only 340 people out of the 12 million odd living in London who could do that job. So that automatically feels like it's going to be hard to fill that role. You then overlay that with data that tells you, and right now, 40 other employers are seeking an ethical hacker. Okay, live adverts out there in the market at the minute, and the advertised salaries range from X to Y. And we know our customers paying X, right? You can almost come up with a sort of difficulty score that ranks how easy or hard that role is going to be to fill. And so I think there's something about the data and our hunger for data and the market's response to that hunger has educated us all, right? Whether it's educated the specialists who we're talking to and we're engaging with, and of course it's educated ourselves, or whether it's educated the generalists. I think just generally the market knows more and is super informed about the possibilities, what they want to achieve, and why. It leads to more interesting customer conversations for sure.
And that, I'm certain that is coming through. You and I have spoken before, Nick, about customer demand for you and your team is always now almost, I think some of the words you've given in the past, it has to be better, it has to be faster, it has to be cheaper, it has to be fairer. Lots of adjectives there. Can you really have it all?
Look, it's a great debate, and it's probably key to most of the conversations that I'm involved in with our customers in terms of trying to say, okay, look, I recognise those four adjectives. I use them quite a lot, and I should probably unpack them a little bit just before we get into them, because I think we all understand what faster recruitment is, and we can kind of understand why an organisation needs to recruit quickly so that someone else doesn't have the talent before they do, right? We live in a sort of instant society where someone decides they want a new job. They don't decide they want a new job in next March. They want a new job in September, and so faster sort of speaks for itself, as does fairer. We need to recruit. We need to recruit workforces with and for our customers that reflect the communities they serve. And I think also the sort of the not wasting public money speaks for itself. But the better one's quite a tricky one. How do you define better recruitment? When do you define better recruitment? At what point is a hire good? Is it at point of offer? Is it at first day? Is it whether or not they've stayed in a productive 6 months into an organization? Is it that they're still here in 2 years and or been promoted? I think there's also some other factors in there because there's how do we reduce the risk of hiring the wrong person? So for some of our customers, sometimes the risk of hiring the wrong individual. I'm not saying it outweighs recruiting the right individual, but it's a key consideration in some of the roles we're recruiting for in public service. And I think there's another factor with better, which is around this data point, which says how do we ensure the recruiting solution gives enough data points for it to be kind of iterative and allow you to constantly make it better. And I think that's so that's sort of that sort of data insight to allow you to then future-proof your solution through iteration is key. But to come back to the original question about competing priorities, clearly one could imagine that there's a potential conflict between, say, better and faster. If you want to fill the role as quickly as possible, then are you really going to have the most rigorous recruiting solution? I could argue if you want to fill the role as fairly as possible, can you do it as quick as if you weren't prioritizing fairness and equality of outcome in the recruiting solution? So the challenge for me and my team is to try and understand, okay, fully accept everyone wants better, faster, fairer, cheaper, right? But if you could only have 3, if you could only have 2, what would they be? How do you rank that? And then how do you use technology and process design, selection process design, to kind of align or tailor that recruiting solution for whichever of those priority outcomes might be?
That's interesting. I like the way now we increasingly hear tech being used in recruitment. This is not new, of course it's not. Your team, yourself, Nick, a lot of effort and time is spent getting the right candidates in, using tech to help do so. AI, something every business is now grappling with, and every sector, recruitment no different, of course. Let's just chat a bit about AI and where it is in the job you're doing every day.
Okay, let's do that. I think there's a few angles to this. There's loads of angles. We could have the whole conversation just about AI. And indeed, most of the conversations out in the recruitment industry at the minute are about AI.
Sure.
But context is everything. Okay. So it talked a little bit about what are the outcomes that our customers trying to achieve. Depending on what those outcomes are, that begins to be the guideline for how you might think about deploying AI. Okay, and just thinking about that context is everything. Our customers work in the public sector. There tends to be two kind of key ways in which we recruit for Gov. Whether that's for the civil service, whether it's for police forces, etc. And that is whether or not recruitment is centralized or not centralized. So where recruitment is centralized, we're tending to kind of recruit large volumes through very standardized frameworks, lots of different recruitment interventions, online assessment centers, maybe video interviews, some sort of online tests, as well as but where they're decentralized, you tend to have a very, very standardized and sort of predetermined recruiting methodology, which quite often in public sector circles is, let's assess a 500-word response to a sort of competency-based question. And my point being around context, where it's centralized, you tend to have a professional recruiter making selection decisions. Okay. Where it's decentralized, that recruitment and selection decision is tending to be made by someone who isn't a recruiter. Recruitment is part of their job, but it's maybe 2% of their job, 3% of their job. So when you overlay the context with, okay, so what are the recruitment outcomes we're trying to achieve, and what are the recruitment resources that we're using? Am I working with a professional recruiter versus am I working with a general manager who has to do this while squeezing it in alongside everything else? You might use AI differently. For example, one of the interesting applications of AI that we're seeing here right now is how do we help recruiters make better decisions? Not how do we use the AI to make the decision to select the candidate, but how do we use the AI to help recommend what questions you should ask the candidate, right? Or what are the keywords and phrases in their answer that maybe you should zero in on to help you assess whether that statement you're assessing is good or bad. So you kind of, this concept of sort of recruiter enablement might be a key way to use AI. I think I'm very grateful that within the wider Sopra Steria organization, we've got a data and AI practice, and we did a webinar a couple of weeks ago with Neil Gladstone, who leads that organization, and he described the AI challenge as a bit of an iceberg. And 95% of the attention is on the little bit of ice above the water. And that's the kind of the attention, that's the AI bit. 95% attention is on the AI, but actually 95% of the effort is the iceberg that's underneath the water. And that's really about the data challenge. So the other part of AI is to make the AI work, you've got to have great data. You've got to have depth of data. And then I suppose the final thought around AI almost just takes us back to that extremes piece that we were talking about right at the top of the call, which is some employers, some recruiters are using AI, some aren't.
That really interests me, Nick, that you're saying AI, some recruiters are using it in depth and others aren't. I guess some of that's customer driven, or there are other reasons behind why AI is not so widespread. Can you maybe explain a bit more about that? It's interesting, certainly.
It's a real mixed economy, Alison, and obviously the tech's moving fast. So yeah, there's capability out there today that was inconceivable only a year ago. So those who are using it are still relatively early adopters, and with early adoption, there's inherent risk. If we think about the organizations that we recruit for, risk is a really important factor in their recruiting decision and their recruiting process and policy. There is essentially, it's fairness by design. Fair and open competition principles kind of sit at the heart of everything. So the notion that there could be unintended consequences of AI, ethical issues associated with AI are still weighing kind of heavily on our customers. I think there's loads that we can use AI for that doesn't drive some of those recruitment decisions. Whether it's AI, for example, to signpost candidates to help them understand where they might best fit. I think that sort of use case is great, and we're already there with some of our customers now. Those sort of using AI to augment rather than to replace decision making. I think is where that comes in. Appetite amongst our customers is growing rapidly. 6 months ago, if we were to kind of score our customers' appetite to deploy AI in the recruiting process, we'd have scored them a 3 or a 4. Couple of exceptions at individual level. I really want it, but the system won't let me. But generally, they were a 3 or a 4. I think we reflected they're probably more of a 6 or a 7 now, and I think it's beginning to move fast. And of course, the Prime Minister in March came out and said, look, where the digital and AI solution could do it better or to the same standard, we need to be using the digital or the AI solution. That does probably raise some questions around what does better mean, right? Coming back to that earlier conversation we had about better recruiting outcomes, and also reflecting on my point that quite often the recruiter might not be a professional recruiter. They might be a manager who does something else, who has to squeeze recruitment in amongst their really busy workload. But generally, adoption of AI, the public sector is behind the private sector curve.
It really is a fascinating topic. And of course, we're surrounded by AI in our personal lives every day. We know that candidates are increasingly leaning towards it. And of course, I think we will have another conversation purely around candidate journey, because that is a podcast all of its own. So I guess, Nick, let's go back then. The thing I really want to know then is, what does good look like? Because, is it AI? Can't use it. So there's a major piece of the puzzle missing for some clients right now. But also, we've talked about data. We keep coming back to that. Give us just a few more pointers from your perspective about what good looks like.
I think I want to finish on candidate experience. Okay, so I'll come back to candidate experience, because I think that's a key component of what good looks like, actually, and I don't think we can afford to lose sight of it, even in this world where we've got loads and loads of applications for a single role. How we deliver a great candidate experience in that context is important. In terms of what good looks like at the minute, it's how do you measure what you want to achieve? So if you've prioritized your outcomes as speed and fairness, I guess they're pretty binary, but you can still measure them in all sorts of different ways. And let's just pick the example of fairness. You want to kind of you want to ensure that your recruiting solution, delivers the right sort of blend of characteristics to reflect the community within which you're hiring and that you serve. You can look at the output measure in terms of the diversity of hires and whether it achieves what you're aspiring to. You can compare it to the current workforce and whether or not it's driving the dial forward one way or another. But what we're doing for many of our customers is kind of live and in the moment by location, measuring each component of the recruitment process and its impact on diversity. So is there any disproportionality being created anywhere in that recruiting funnel? So if 51% of applicants are female and we want equal gender representation in the role, if 51% of applicants are female, not just are 51% of applicants being appointed into post, but are 50, does that sort of correlate right the way through each part of the sort of sifting process, so that you can see where is there any disproportionality. And of course, at a micro level, with the right data tools, you can even identify by recruiter and potentially identify opportunities for training, retraining, education, and the depth of data points that are out there are huge. It's aligning those data points to the outcomes that you're seeking.
Nick, that word extremes keeps coming up, and we know this podcast we're talking about extremes in a jobs market, which has changed greatly since COVID in particular. You just referred there to the funnel. We all have a picture in our mind of what a funnel is, something that allows a process to move smoothly and to go through. We take our time, we get through the funnel. Candidate experience in this extreme job market, I suspect, might come unpicked there. Can you maybe explain some more about that?
Yeah, it's funnel economics, as we talk about it, is quite an interesting idea. Have you got a very kind of narrow funnel, and you imagine me? I know you can't see me, but I've got my hands quite close together, and they're roughly vertical, right? You haven't got many applicants for not many jobs. It's quite a vertical funnel. You've got to do everything you can to keep people in that funnel, versus the very shallow funnel. And I've now got my hands splayed out with my fingers kind of pointing out towards the corners of the screen, where you've got hundreds of applicants for a given role, and you've got to quite quickly, and I think quickly is the key, you've got to quite quickly identify of those candidates which are the ones most likely to get through the funnel. Some of that's skill, some of that's motivation, in order to kind of ensure that your human resource, your recruiters, are talking to the candidates and engaging with the candidates most likely to progress. So, extreme example, and this is about extremes, in peak COVID time, DWP asked us to double the number of work coaches in Job Centre Plus estate. Okay. Unprecedented challenge. No one knew what COVID was like. And this was the sort of summer of 2020, when many of us really had no idea what this pandemic was going to do to the country in any way, shape or form. What was most prevalent was nobody other than DWP was recruiting. So what was really interesting was we were really constrained in terms of the time window that we had to get people in post, because the job centre's need was now. All right. So we were going to place these adverts out in the market, and we anticipated we were going to be inundated with applicants. We couldn't guess how many, because there's no data. Talking about the use of data, there's no data you can draw on to say last time we were recruiting in a context like this, it looked, this is what we could expect.
Indeed.
And all we kind of knew was the customer wanted to hire X thousand people, and they wanted to hire X thousand people and have them in post within 6 months. So we needed a really quick process. We needed a really fair process, because of course that's what Job Centre Plus and DWP do. It's about accessibility for all into work. And so what we had to do in this case was we had to design a very, very granular digital selection assessment. And typically this might be ranked 20 things, most least, and typically that gives you sort of 40 data points, because you've got the most and the least. To allow us to sort of fairly and more dynamically, granularly select which were the right applicants to take through to the more human elements of the process, we essentially got people to, instead of looking at 5 statements, to pick the most and the least. We asked them to rank them in order, which then gave us 100 data points, because essentially we had A, B, C, D, and E for 20 questions. And it's a long-winded way of saying, how did we use the digital tools to manage that extreme to quite quickly and fairly narrow us down from thousands, hundreds of thousands of applications to the amount of applications that we could handle through the recruiting process in that short, finite time window available to us. So recruitment funnel economics, as we talk about it in our team, is kind of a really key thing to understand when you're not peak pandemic. Understand what and anticipate what might happen when you advertise this role. What this recruitment context is, and therefore what the funnel is going to look like, and crew up accordingly.
It is fascinating. And of course, as we said at the very start of the podcast, very often our biggest exposure to recruitment is applying for a job ourselves, and this idea that there's a lot of tech going on behind the scenes is just interesting and fascinating. But also our experience, how it made us feel, is the thing we remember most. So candidate experience is always the one piece that you take away, successful or otherwise, in how you got on in the process. So Nick, let's just finish today. We're going to come back to another subject in another podcast, but let's finish today just with candidate experience. You have many years in recruiting, 30 almost, you've told us. You must have started very young. Just tell us, candidate experience, what's good?
What's good is probably begins with really grasping what it is a candidate wants at different points of their conversation with a recruiter. And then, for me, that kind of begins with a kind of welcome me, be accessible. Okay. There's then something about understanding me. And then you get into helping me. Okay. So I think that's sort of what actually, how do we want that candidate to feel as they move through the recruiting process? Is really important. I think one of the challenges for our customers is how do I hinted at the fact that recruitments need to be good economists. Recruitment also need to be really good marketeers. And perhaps that's a challenge for the public sector, because there perhaps might not be that much commercial marketing experience in a public sector organisation. So how do you best sell your role, your employer proposition to a candidate? Let's pick an example. The pension offer from government is better than the pension offer from the private sector, typically, and I'm generalising. Okay, now this has sort of sunk in, and government is undoubtedly getting better at articulating the fact that the contributory pension offer is far greater and really worth something material. But I still wonder whether or not it's being sold in quite the way that would mean the most to an applicant. And if I think about why is that pension particularly attractive to me, unless I'm kind of a little bit older in life, when I probably know a little bit more about pensions. Yeah, the key attraction of that public sector pension might be you're going to be able to retire 7 years earlier with this pension than you would be able to with a sort of typical private sector pension. So I think there's something around that sort of marketing and finding that why. And then I think the last part, and I think this is really important, is we do something which we call make it real. We've got to help our applicants understand what it's really like, make it authentic and make it real. And we do a lot of centralised recruitment for government. And of course, one of the disadvantages of centralised recruitment is you're not necessarily talking to the hiring manager, the person who does that job, the person who runs that team. So one of the things we do for our recruiting teams is we bring people who do the job regularly in to meet our teams, talk to our recruiters about what it's like to work in this particular environment, what it's like to do this job, and what it feels like when it works, and also what it feels like when it doesn't, because that making it real element is absolutely key to better recruitment decisions. And better recruitment decisions aren't a one-way street. They're not just about the recruiter making better recruitment decisions. We've got to help the candidate make the right recruitment decisions too. I hope that just gives a little bit of flavour of where we might go next time.
Thank you, Nick. What an interesting conversation. Enlightening, quite far-reaching. We've touched on the customer, the conversations we need to have for recruitment, both sides. We've talked about applicant tracking systems. We've gone to AI and data, the real hot subjects in recruitment at the moment. But we have come back to candidate experience and making sure that the recruiter is happy and the candidate, the successful applicant, is happy too. That seems to me like recruitment working as it should. Thank you very much for joining me this morning, Nick. For those of you who are joining our podcast for the first time, please head over to Sopra Steria's website. You'll find more insights there and more podcasts on a variety of topics. And thanks for listening. And we look forward to you joining us again in future.